My wedding day with Kevin. My best friend clapped my shoulder with a sigh. Mindy, you're a negotiation goddess, a crisis management expert, but the battlefield of family is a million times fiercer than the corporate world. Are you sure? At the time, I just smiled. I thought that with a husband who was a scientist, constantly buried in his lab, almost immune to drama, married life would surely be as simple as his nature. Today, exactly 3 months after the wedding, I realize with crushing clarity that my friend was right, and I was incredibly naive. Naive to an alarming degree. Kevin wasn't home for dinner tonight. He had an important conference in another city. At the dining table, it was just me, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Zhang, and my little sister-in-law, Annie. The air, already heavy as lead, suddenly gave way to a shattering sound, mirroring the jade bangle on Annie's wrist. Before I could even process what happened, Annie clutched her wrist, tears welling in her eyes, and sobbed as she turned to my mother-in-law. "Mom, it was your bangle." I only showed it to my sister-in-law for a moment, and she dropped it. I raised an eyebrow, a classic act. So classic, in fact, if I were scoring, I'd give her an A for rapid roll entry and tear control. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Zhang, instantly changed expression. She didn't spare me a single glance, rushing to embrace her precious daughter. Her voice was filled with both sorrow and indignation. "Oh, my Annie, this bangle is a family heirloom, what I meant to give you as part of your dowry later. How could you carelessly hand it to an outsider?" The words, outsider, were hammered home, each syllable a dagger plunged into my ear. I remained silent, my gaze turning cold as I observed this mother-daughter duo's perfectly choreographed act. Annie nestled into her mother's arms, her shoulders trembling violently, her voice filled with utter grievance. "I didn't mean to. My sister-in-law said she wanted to see it, and I thought we were family, but I didn't expect her to drop it so carelessly." I smirked inwardly. A flawless script, motive, plot, outcome, witnesses, physical evidence, all pointing squarely at me. If I were an ordinary daughter-in-law, I would have probably panicked, stammered apologies, and meekly accepted my punishment by now. But I am Mindy Wu. Before marrying into the KH-1EAFC family, I had handled over a dozen reputation crisis cleanups for major corporations. Such amateur theatrics were, to me, nothing more than a childish prank. Seeing my continued silence, my mother-in-law finally turned to me, her gaze sharp as a knife. "Mindy Wu, what are you still sitting there for? Don't you see the huge trouble you've caused? Apologize to Annie at once. This bangle costs millions, you can't just replace it." I slowly put down my chopsticks, looking directly at her, my voice remarkably calm. "Mother, I didn't drop it." A short, concise statement without a hint of unnecessary emotion. Annie froze, seemingly unprepared for my direct denial. She stammered, "Sister, you're lying, you clearly dropped it." Then, turning to her mother, "Mom, look at her. She made a mistake and won't even admit it." My mother-in-law slammed the table, roaring, "You still dare to deny it? My Annie has been well-behaved since she was little. Are you suggesting she broke the bangle herself and then blamed you? Do you think we, the KH-1EAFC family, are all fools?" I maintained my calm expression. "I didn't mean that. I'm simply stating the truth." The truth is you're jealous of Annie, and seeing how much I favor her, you deliberately sabotaged her. Isn't that it?" My mother-in-law's logic truly was an eye-opener. I took a deep breath. All right, time to get to work. I stood up, walked to the shattered jade fragments, and knelt to examine them. "Mother, you said this bangle is a family heirloom, very valuable, right?" Mrs. Zhang snorted. "Of course, you couldn't afford it even if you sold your entire fortune." "Then we must make things clear." With that, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Mr. Zhang from Wanbao Appraisal Shop. This is Mindy Wu. I have a broken jade bangle and would like to ask you to come and assess its current condition, estimated remaining value, and restoration cost. Yes, the KH-1EAFC family residence. Please come as soon as you can." Both my mother-in-law and Annie looked bewildered. Clearly, this move was not in their script. Hanging up, I turned back and smiled faintly. To ensure fair and transparent compensation, I think we should have a professional third party evaluate it. This also protects the family's assets, doesn't it, Mother? My mother-in-law choked, unable to utter a word. Annie quickly interjected. "It's just family matters, why call outsiders? Don't you trust Mom and me?" It's not about not trusting you, I said, my voice still gentle. It's just Annie, you should know that with valuable items like this, every crack, every fragment can tell the story of the impact's origin. Was it a strong collision or pressure from a single point? Did it fall from a height or was it snapped? Experts can tell immediately just by looking. We shouldn't let emotions interfere. We must respect objective facts. Every word I spoke was gentle, yet they landed like sledgehammers pounding into their psyches. Annie's face began to pale. Seeing the situation going awry, my mother-in-law quickly changed tactics, switching from offense to playing the victim. She sighed, her voice full of sorrow. Oh, all right. Consider it my bad luck. It's come to this, calling anyone won't help. You don't need to do it anymore. I just hope you'll treat Annie a little better from now on. That would satisfy me. A highly skilled tactical retreat. She wanted to use morality to bind me, turning me into a petty, calculating miser. But she was mistaken. I smiled and shook my head. No, Mother. My reputation is more important than money. I said I didn't do it, and I must prove it. Otherwise, if anything goes missing in this house later, won't I be the first one suspected? With that, I glanced towards a corner of the living room, where a tiny black dot was affixed to the ceiling. Fortunately, Kevin was concerned about home security, so before he left on his business trip, he asked me to install a new surveillance camera system. 4K resolution, complete with audio and night vision infrared. Shall I play back the recording from earlier for you and Annie to see? We can check it together for fairness. The moment I uttered the words camera, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Annie's face drained of all color. My mother-in-law was stunned, her gaze shifting from surprise to panic. You dared to install cameras in this house? Mrs. Zhang stammered. Yes, Mother. I only installed them in common areas like the living room and dining room, just in case of theft. This is our home, after all. Safety comes first, doesn't it? I replied casually. I picked up the TV remote and calmly said, I'll just connect it to the system. It should only take about 30 seconds. Then Annie screamed, her voice cracking with fear. She lunged forward and clutched my arm. Her tears, this time, were no longer an act but genuine. Sister-in-law, I'm sorry, it was me, I was careless. Finally, a confession. My mother-in-law, seeing her daughter like this, was fuming with anger and shame, her face flushed crimson. She glared at me. You're truly something. You haven't been in this house for long and you're already scheming against your own family. Do you want to turn this house into chaos? I calmly detached Annie's hand and looked directly at my mother-in-law. Mother, I've never wanted to cause chaos. I only want fairness. From beginning to end, who was truly plotting? Mother, you know best. I can choose not to pursue this matter today, but I have one condition. Just as the atmosphere was tense as a violin string, my phone rang. It was Kevin calling via video. I glanced at the mother and daughter standing before me, a faint smirk played on my lips, and then I answered. Honey, are you done with work already? The phone screen lit up, revealing Kevin's handsome yet somewhat weary face. He wore silver-rimmed glasses that highlighted his tall, straight nose and deep-set eyes. He looked exactly like a scientist who had just emerged from his lab, an intelligent aura, yet with a touch of naivete regarding the outside world. Mindy, have you had dinner yet? Are Mom and Annie there? His voice was deep and warm, carrying genuine concern. I smiled, a flawlessly professional smile, and gently rotated my phone camera to pan across the dining room. We're just having dinner, honey. Mom and Annie are here too. My camera coincidentally panned across the chaotic dining table, coincidentally swept over the shattered jade pieces on the floor, and coincidentally lingered for a few seconds on Annie's tear-streaked face and my mother-in-law's rigid, furious expression. Kevin on the other end paused, his brows slightly furrowing. With the brain of a scientist, he immediately detected the abnormality. What's wrong? Why is Annie crying? Before I could answer, Annie startled, hastily wiping away her tears and waving her hands at the screen. And nothing, big brother, I just watched a really moving movie. A lie so clumsy it was almost pathetic. I stifled a laugh and smoothly continued. Yes, that's right, honey, it's just a small matter. Mother gave her that family heirloom bangle. Annie was so happy she accidentally dropped it. Just a little regret for a child, you know. I said the words, a child, very lightly, but they landed like an invisible slap. Annie was 24 this year, about to graduate from university, no longer a child. My mother-in-law's face grew even uglier when she heard me. I had pushed her into an impossible dilemma. If she denied it, saying I broke it, she would essentially be admitting her daughter had just lied to her brother. But if she admitted it, wouldn't her entire scheme to blame me collapse completely in front of her son? Mrs. Zhang could only grit her teeth and force out a strained smile. Yes, that's right. Annie is just clumsy, dear. Don't worry. Kevin stared at the screen, his eyes sweeping across his mother's and sister's expressions, then resting on my calm face. He was silent for a few seconds, as if analyzing data. Finally, he said, "If it's broken, then it's broken. Objects can be replaced. What matters is that the family is harmonious. Mindy, I trust your handling of it." A simple statement, yet it was an absolute affirmation. He asked no further questions, showed no suspicion. He chose to believe me. I smiled this time, a genuine smile. "Yes, honey, please focus on your work. I've got everything covered here." After hanging up, the smile on my lips instantly vanished. I turned to look at the mother and daughter, who were now sighing with relief, my voice dropping a few degrees. That was just the warm-up. Now let's talk about my condition. Mrs. Zhang cleared her throat, trying to regain her air of authority. "What do you want?" "Very simple," I said. "First, I will not compensate for this bangle, but I will cover the repair costs. The appraiser will be here soon. We'll proceed according to their findings." I paused, my sharp gaze sweeping over Annie, who was now cowering. "Second, and most importantly, starting today, Annie must move out." "What?" my mother-in-law shrieked, unable to believe her ears. "Are you insane? She's your sister-in-law, my own daughter. What right do you have to kick her out of the house?" "I'm not kicking her out," I shrugged. "I'm merely helping her grow up. She's 24 years old. She can't keep living under her mother's protection, breeding childish thoughts and actions like today's incident. Moving out to live independently, learning to take responsibility for her own life, that's what's best for her." "I don't agree," Mrs. Zhang firmly declared. "You don't need to agree," I retorted immediately. "This isn't a negotiation, it's an announcement. If you don't want Kevin to know the full truth through the crystal-clear 4K video footage, it's best to listen to me. He's a scientist. He believes in evidence, not tears." I picked up my phone and opened an app. "The apartment across from my office is vacant. I'll rent it for her for 1 year and I'll pay the rent. After 1 year, she'll have to support herself. I think as a sister-in-law, I've already shown more than enough kindness." My mother-in-law was trembling with rage, pointing a finger at my face. "You—" Just then, the doorbell rang. Mr. Zhang from Wanbao Appraisal Shop had arrived. I went to open the door, politely inviting him in. Mr. Zhang was a seasoned expert. Just a glance at the fragments on the floor, and he subtly shook his head. He carefully put on gloves, then used tweezers to pick up each piece, examining them under a magnifying glass. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law stood beside him, their hearts pounding. After about 10 minutes, Mr. Zhang looked up at me, then at Mrs. Zhang, his gaze a little complex. "Mrs. KH letter 1 EAFC, Ms. Wu, this bangle has a problem." "What problem?" Mrs. Zhang pressed. Mr. Zhang pushed up his glasses. "Firstly, this is not natural grade A jadeite. This is grade B, treated with acid and resin injected. Its actual market value is less than 20,000 yuan. My mother-in-law's face turned from red to ashen. She stammered, "Impossible, this is a family heirloom." Mr. Zhang sighed. "Perhaps even the ancients sometimes misidentified things, but more importantly, there's the break." He pointed to a large fragment. "Everyone, look. The cut is very clean and flat. This doesn't look like a break from impact or a free fall. The force applied to this bangle was more akin to it being deliberately snapped with 2 hands." His final statement was a fatal blow. All eyes turned to Annie. She swayed unsteadily, then slumped onto the floor, her face devoid of all color. Under the expert's scrutiny, her clumsy act was utterly exposed. I looked at my mother-in-law, who was stunned by the double shock, and gently said, "Do you see, Mother? It turns out I was not only wrongly accused of breaking the bangle, but I almost had to pay an absurd sum for a fake item. I think the conditions I've set are still too lenient." As Mr. Zhang's words faded, the living room fell into a deadly silence. Only Annie's ragged breaths from the floor and my mother-in-law's grinding teeth could be heard. After a few seconds of shock, Mrs. Zhang suddenly turned to me like a cornered beast, her eyes bloodshot. Mindy Wu, was it you? Was it you who conspired with him to humiliate my daughter and me? What did the KH letter 1EAFC family ever do to offend you for you to use such dirty tricks? A classic reversal, blaming the victim and the truth teller. I was far too familiar with this tactic. I didn't bother to argue. I simply turned to Mr. Zhang and smiled politely. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for coming all this way. I'd like to pay the appraisal fee now. With that, I opened my wallet, pulled out a thick wad of cash, and respectfully handed it to him. Here is 2,000 yuan for your service and a small token of my appreciation. I'll have a driver take you home. My actions served two purposes. First, it showed respect for the expert, immediately squashing my mother-in-law's accusation of conspiracy. Second, it showed her that I had ample financial resources and professionalism. I was not someone to be trifled with. Mr. Zhang accepted the money, nodded to me approvingly, and left. As the door closed, I turned around, the smile vanishing from my lips, replaced by a cold, sharp expression. Mother, do you know what crime Annie's actions today could constitute if pursued to the fullest extent of the law? Mrs. Zhang froze. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm not talking nonsense. I slowly walked towards her, my voice not loud, but every word clear and distinct. Deliberately destroying property, then falsely accusing someone else, and simultaneously using a fake item to demand a large sum of compensation. Mother, this is no longer just a family matter. This is fraud and embezzlement of property. Should I call my lawyer or dial 911 directly? The words lawyer and 911 exploded like two bombs in my mother-in-law's head. She took a step back, her eyes filled with terror. She could be domineering within the family, but facing the law, she was just an ordinary woman. You wouldn't dare. Why wouldn't I dare? I raised an eyebrow. I am the victim. I have ample evidence in hand. The expert appraiser's testimony, the 4K security camera footage, and most importantly, Annie's own confession. What do you think Kevin will side with after seeing all this? A wrongfully accused wife or a scheming younger sister and a mother who condoned evil? Each of my questions landed like a hammer blow, shattering Mrs. Zhang's defenses. She looked at her trembling daughter on the floor, then at me, standing tall with an overwhelming presence. Finally, her arrogance crumbled. What do you want? Her voice was weak, hinting at compromise. I've already said my conditions are very lenient. I held up one finger. First, Annie moves out. I'm giving her 1 hour starting now to pack her bags. My car is already waiting at the gate. I held up a second finger. Second, I can choose not to report this fraud to the police, but she must pay for her actions. The fake bangle was worth 20,000 yuan, and she deliberately broke it. So she must sign a promissory note worth 10 times that, 2 million yuan, as a tuition fee for her first lesson in honesty. 2 million? You're insane, my mother-in-law shrieked. I'm not insane, I retorted coldly. Compared to her going to jail and the KH letter 1EAFC family's reputation being ruined, this amount is dirt cheap. This money will be transferred to a family emergency fund managed by me. Later, if the family needs anything, I will use it. Don't worry, Mother, the money in the fund stays in the fund. I won't take a single cent. This was the most vicious blow. I was not only punishing them, but also seizing financial control in the process. I looked deep into her eyes, then raised my last finger. Third, both you and Annie must each write a self-reflection statement detailing the entire incident today, then sign and fingerprint it. This is my guarantee, so that no one can ever renege and claim I was overly pushy. 3 conditions, each one like a knife piercing Mrs. Zhang's heart and liver, but she had no other choice. Her only lifeline at this moment was my silence. She closed her eyes, her entire body trembling, before finally nodding with great difficulty. All right, I agree. I smiled, satisfied. Excellent. Then please, Mother and Annie, begin. Paper and pens are ready on the desk. With that, I sat down on the sofa, crossed my legs, and casually scrolled through news on my phone, ignoring the mother and daughter clutching each other, sobbing miserably. It took so much effort to straighten out this toxic family. Exactly 1 hour later, Annie carried a small suitcase, her face puffy and swollen, not daring to look at me. She shuffled out the door. Mrs. Zhang handed me 2 hastily written self-reflection statements and a signed promissory note. I carefully tucked them into the mini safe in my bedroom. When I came out, Mrs. Zhang stood on the staircase, looking at me with a gaze filled with resentment. Don't get too smug too soon. When Kevin returns, I'll definitely tell him your true colors. I leaned against the door, crossing my arms over my chest, a smirk playing on my lips. I welcome it, but Mother should remember my evidence is an unerasable video file, while yours is just tears. What do you think my scientist husband will believe more? With that, I didn't spare her another glance, turned, and went straight into the bedroom, slamming the door shut. That night, I slept the soundest I had in 3 months. I thought I would have a peaceful night to enjoy my first victory, but I was mistaken. Lady Luck, it seemed, wasn't keen on allowing this family drama a single moment of respite. In the middle of the night, just as I drifted into sleep, the familiar sound of an engine echoed outside the gate, followed by the opening of the front door. Kevin was home, a day earlier than expected. I shot up, not out of worry, but exhilaration. The best act was only just beginning. I quickly pulled on my silk nightgown and calmly walked out of the room. As expected, my mother-in-law had already made her move. She rushed out of her room without even changing her pajamas, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with tears, looking as pathetic as if she had just survived a major catastrophe. She rushed down the stairs, embracing Kevin, who had just stepped through the door, wailing. "Kevin, my son, you're back. If you hadn't come home, your mother and sister would have been bullied to death." Kevin, still pulling his suitcase, froze at his mother's dramatic welcome. He looked at her bewildered, then glanced up at me standing on the staircase, his eyes full of confusion. "Mother, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" My mother-in-law began her tragic monologue. "What else could be wrong? It's your good wife. She falsely accused Annie of breaking the jade bangle, then forced her to sign a promissory note for 2 million yuan. She even kicked Annie out of the house in the middle of the night. Kevin, look, is there any place left for your mother and sister in this house?" She cried and complained, exaggerating and embellishing, transforming me from a victim into a cruel stepmother, while casting herself and her daughter as two pitiable, tormented Snow Whites. I stood above them, arms crossed, silently observing her performance. I didn't interject a single word. I wanted to see how my scientist husband would react to such a blatant logical fallacy right before his eyes. Kevin listened to his mother in silence until she finished, his brows furrowing tighter and tighter. He didn't look at me, nor did he comfort his mother. He simply set his suitcase down, his voice unusually calm. "Mother, you said Mindy forced Annie to sign a promissory note for 2 million yuan. "Yes, she clearly set a trap for the poor girl," my mother-in-law eagerly nodded. "And Mindy kicked Annie out of the house." "Yes, I saw it with my own eyes. She called a car and sent her away." Kevin nodded, as if confirming data. Then he turned to look at me, his deep gaze fixed on mine. "Mindy, is what Mother said true?" This was the question my mother-in-law had been waiting for. She looked at me triumphantly, certain that her son would side with her. I smiled, a gentle yet impactful smile. I walked down the stairs, stopping in front of the two of them. "Yes, half of it is true." "Half of it?" Kevin asked again. "That's right," I replied. "It's true that Annie signed a promissory note and moved out, but the reasons are not as Mother described." "You're still denying it." My mother-in-law began to wail again. "Mother, please don't rush." I raised a hand, signaling her to calm down. "I know you're emotional, but Kevin is a scientist. He needs objective evidence, not a one-sided story." I turned to Kevin. "Honey, I know you're very tired from your business trip, but there's a very fascinating scientific documentary I think you'll want to watch. It records the entire process of how a theatrical plot was staged and subsequently collapsed." With that, I picked up the TV remote and turned on the large screen in the living room. Our home camera system has cloud storage. Everything is still intact. My mother-in-law's face turned ashen. She didn't expect me to go to such lengths. You wouldn't dare." I didn't answer her, focusing only on operating the remote. Soon, the ultra-sharp 4K video began to play. The entire living room fell silent, with only the clear audio from the TV echoing. The video started from when Annie whined to see the bangle, then the scene where she furtively glanced at me, and then definitively broke the bangle with both hands. This was followed by her crying and blaming me, my confrontation, the call to the appraiser. Mr. Zhang's testimony about the fake bangle and the deliberate break. Finally, it showed Annie's panicked confession of everything, without a single detail missed. Kevin stood silently like a statue, his eyes glued to the screen. The more he watched, the colder and more disappointed his expression became. His silver-rimmed glasses couldn't hide the sharpness in his eyes now. When the video ended, he said nothing. He simply took off his outer jacket, sat down on the sofa, removed his glasses, and wearily rubbed his temples. My mother-in-law swayed unsteadily. The evidence was too damning. She had no words left to defend herself. She could only stammer, "Kevin, son, listen to me explain." Kevin raised a hand, cutting her off. He didn't look at her, only at the empty space in front of him, his voice hoarse. "Mother, I just want to ask one question. How exactly have you raised Annie all these years?" A gentle question, yet it was like a knife plunged straight into Mrs. Zhang's heart. It was a disappointment to the absolute extreme. Kevin's question hung in the air, colder and sharper than any reprimand. Mrs. Zhang was stunned, her lips trembling but unable to utter a word. The disappointment of the son she had always been so proud of was 1,000 times more painful than any criticism from outsiders. Kevin didn't wait for his mother to reply. He put his glasses back on, the cold, rational demeanor of a scientist returning. He looked at me, his gaze not apologetic on behalf of his family, but acknowledging. "Mindy, you did very well." His voice was even, devoid of any superfluous emotion. "You handled the problem based on evidence and logic. That is the most correct method." Then he turned to his mother. "Mother, in my lab, when an experiment yields erroneous results, we don't blame the results. We reevaluate the entire process, identify the confounding variables, and recalibrate our methods." He paused, his eyes looking directly at her. "Annie is the result, and Mother's upbringing process had serious flaws. Mother's blind indulgence was the variable that ruined this entire experiment." Every word he spoke was not heavy, yet it was like a scientific indictment, sharply analyzed, leaving no room for rebuttal. My mother-in-law completely collapsed. She slumped onto the sofa, tears welling in her eyes, switching from an offensive stance to a weak defensive one. "Kevin, Mother just loved her too much. You weren't home, I only had her for company." "Love is not an excuse for indulgence," Kevin interrupted, his voice still unchanged. "Proper love must be based on principles and guidance. You've turned her into an overgrown child, incapable of distinguishing right from wrong, ready to use any means to harm others. Do you know what the consequences would have been if Mindy hadn't handled this skillfully today and reported it to the police?" He took out his phone and dialed Annie's number. The other end answered almost immediately, her sobbing voice echoing. "Big brother, you're back. Did Mom tell you? Sister-in-law, she." "I've seen the camera footage, Annie." Kevin coldly cut short her theatrics. The other end fell silent. "Annie," he continued, "your actions have violated the most basic principles of honesty and family conduct. Mindy's decision is entirely correct and necessary for your character development." "Big brother, I was wrong. Please let me come home." "No," Kevin refused decisively. "Consider this year of independence a mandatory internship in basic life skills and ethics. The 2 million yuan promissory note remains valid. That is the tuition fee for your mistake. I will not intervene. After 1 year, if your internship results meet the requirements, we will talk again. Hang up now." He ended the call cleanly, giving his sister no further opportunity to plead. The entire house fell silent again. My mother-in-law sat there, her face ashen. Her plan to use her son against her daughter-in-law had failed miserably. In fact, it had backfired, causing her son to side completely with me. Kevin stood up and picked up his suitcase. He walked to me, gently taking my hand. "I'm sorry you had to face all of this alone. From now on, the rules of this house will be reset. Everything will be based on truth and evidence. You are the mistress of this house. You have full decision-making power." With that, he pulled his suitcase and went straight upstairs, leaving me and my mother-in-law in the living room. I looked at her. She was glaring at me with eyes filled with both resentment and helplessness. I knew she would never give up. This defeat would only make her more determined to remove me from this house. I smiled, a knowing smile. "Mother, it seems Mother's experiment has yielded an unexpected result. Would you like to try a new method? I'm always ready." With that, I too turned and went upstairs, following Kevin. In the room, he had already taken off his jacket and was standing by the window, looking out. I walked over and poured him a glass of warm water. He turned to look at me, the coldness in his eyes replaced by a hint of remorse. I didn't think things would be so complicated. "It's all right," I handed him the glass of water. "Your laboratory researches matter, and my laboratory researches human nature. In essence, they both require observation and experimentation." He chuckled, a rare laugh. "So, what's your experimental conclusion today?" I took a sip of tea, looked into his eyes, and slowly said, "The conclusion is that the old system is rotten. It needs to be completely torn down and rebuilt. And I am the chief engineer for this reconstruction project." He gently squeezed my hand in reply. The storm may not have completely ended, but as long as this man stood beside me, standing on the side of truth, no matter how fierce the battlefield, I would have enough confidence to win. The next morning, the atmosphere in the KH1EAFC household was so heavy it could be cut with a knife. Kevin and I came downstairs for breakfast. My mother-in-law was already seated, but today she wasn't wailing or crying. Instead, she wore a resentful, resigned air of a wounded mother. Her eyes were sunken, her face haggard, as if she hadn't slept all night. On the dining table, there were only 2 dishes, a bowl of oatmeal that Kevin loved most, and a plate of slightly burnt fried eggs. She gently pushed the bowl of oatmeal towards her son, her voice hoarse and weak. "Kevin, eat, my son. Mother was so worried about Annie all night that I couldn't sleep. I only managed to make your favorite. Please eat this for now." She completely ignored my presence. This "I am the victim, my daughter-in-law treats me poorly" act. She performed it even more professionally than Annie. Kevin looked at the bowl of oatmeal, then at me, who was sitting in front of an empty plate. He frowned and put down his spoon. "Mother, what about Mindy?" My mother-in-law sighed dramatically. "Oh, I'm old now, my mind is muddled. I forgot that the mistress of the house is also here. Let me go down to the kitchen and see if there's anything left." A truly perfect retreating to advance tactic. She wanted my husband to see that I was tormenting her, making her afraid to even prepare a meal for her daughter-in-law. But I didn't give her a chance to continue her act. I smiled and stopped her. "No need, mother. I'm not used to eating breakfast. A glass of water is fine." With that, I calmly poured myself a glass of plain water. My action stunned both Kevin and my mother-in-law. She had wanted to use this trick to create conflict between my husband and me, but she didn't expect me to not get angry, not argue, but simply neutralize it with ease. The atmosphere became even more awkward. Seeing her first trick fail, my mother-in-law immediately launched her second, a much more insidious attack. After breakfast, as Kevin and I were getting ready for work, she suddenly called out, "Kevin, Mindy, wait a moment." She slowly walked into the study, and a moment later, returned with a thick stack of ledgers, a bundle of bank cards, and a bunch of keys. She placed them all on the coffee table, pushing them towards me. "Mindy," her voice was filled with weariness and resignation. "Up until now, all household expenses have been managed by me, but now I'm old and my health is failing. After Annie's incident, my spirits have also plummeted, and I no longer have the energy to manage things." She took a deep breath, as if making an incredibly painful decision. "Starting today, all the finances of this household I hand over to you. You are the mistress of the house. It is proper for you to manage them. I hope you'll handle things well and not let the KH1EAFC family fall into decline in your hands." If I were an ordinary daughter-in-law, I would surely be moved to tears by my mother-in-law's trust in entrusting me with such an important responsibility. But I am Mindy Wu. I clearly saw that this was not trust, this was a trap. A financial trap meticulously laid. Within those ledgers, there were surely countless ambiguous expenses, financial pitfalls she had already dug. As soon as I took over, if any problems arose later, she would dump all responsibility onto me. At that point, she would have an excuse to tell Kevin that I was incompetent in managing and was ruining the KH1EAFC family's assets. I looked at her, then at my husband, who was also a little surprised. I smiled. "Mother, you've placed such trust in me. I'm truly touched. I will certainly not disappoint your expectations." Mrs. Zhang and Kevin were both surprised by my quick agreement. Just as a triumphant smile began to play on her lips, I continued. "However," I said, "to ensure the handover process is transparent and professional, avoiding any unnecessary misunderstandings later, I have a small suggestion." I looked directly at Kevin. "Honey, I think we should hire an independent auditing firm. They will review all family expenses for the past 3 years. This has two benefits. First, it gives us a comprehensive and scientific overview of the family's financial situation. Second, it ensures that when I take over, everything starts from a transparent baseline. I don't want to be held responsible later for any pre-existing issues. My mother-in-law's expression changed, her smile rigid on her lips. I still wasn't finished. After we receive the audit report, I will use it to establish a monthly household budget. All expenses, from grocery money, utility bills, to mother's pocket money, will be clearly regulated. Any expenses incurred outside the budget will require approval signatures from both you and me. I turned to my mother-in-law, my smile even brighter. Don't worry, Mother. With that budget, you only need to enjoy life. You won't have to worry about managing finances anymore. Consider it Kevin and me showing filial piety to you. Kevin, being a scientist, heard my clear, logical, and systematic plan, and his eyes lit up. He nodded immediately. This method is very scientific. Go ahead with what Mindy suggests. Transparency is best. My mother-in-law's hand, resting on the stack of ledgers, began to tremble. She couldn't believe that the trap she had laid not only failed to harm me, but was flipped back on her, turning into a genuine transfer of power. She was about to go from manager to monthly allowance recipient. Financial power, once her last weapon in this house, was about to be openly and legally seized. She looked at me, her eyes no longer filled with resentment but with horror. She realized that the daughter-in-law she was up against was not a meek lamb, but a seasoned wolf in sheep's clothing. My working speed has always been measured in hours, not days. The very next morning, while my mother-in-law was still half asleep, descending the stairs, hoping to find a way to postpone or cancel the audit catastrophe, a professional team of 4 people, impeccably dressed in suits, briefcases in hand, stood formally at the door. Good morning, Mrs. KH Letter 1 EAFC. We are from Y&I Financial Auditing Firm. Ms. Wu scheduled us. The team leader, a middle-aged man wearing glasses, bowed politely. Mrs. Zhang stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, her face paling. She probably thought I was just making empty threats, never expecting me to act so swiftly, even inviting one of the Big 4 auditing firms. This wasn't just inviting an expert, it was bringing in a financial special forces team. Kevin emerged from the dining room, a slice of sandwich in hand, nodding with satisfaction. Mindy, you really are efficient. I smiled, leading the audit team into the family study, where my mother-in-law's stack of ledgers still sat precariously on the desk. I apologize for the inconvenience, everyone. These are all the handwritten ledgers from the past 3 years. Additionally, I've emailed all the bank statements for the family's accounts. Please feel free to work. The audit team quickly got to work. The rustling of papers, the clicking of keyboards, and the exchange of professional terminology filled the room, transforming the study into a veritable command center. My mother-in-law stood outside the door, her face alternating between green and white, pacing like an ant on a hot griddle. She dared not enter, but also dared not leave. By late morning, she seemed unable to bear it any longer. She sought out Kevin, who was sitting in the living room reading documents, and began her old tactics. Kevin, she said, her eyes welling up. Mother knows I made mistakes regarding Annie, but this is our home. Why let outsiders rummage through everything like this? Family matters should be kept private. Letting them in here is like airing our dirty laundry. How will others view our KH Letter 1 EAFC family later? Kevin pushed up his glasses, looking up from his document, his gaze utterly calm. Mother, this isn't airing our dirty laundry. This is called establishing a transparent governance system. In science, we make our data public for other scientists to review. That's how we ensure results aren't skewed. Family management is the same. The more transparent, the fewer problems. His scientific reasoning once again doused my mother-in-law with cold water. She was speechless. Seeing that emotional manipulation had failed, she switched to a direct attack. She marched over to the study door, blocking an auditor who was exiting. Hey, you! Those ledgers for wedding gifts, funeral money, and other family celebrations are private matters. You have no right to see them. The young man looked flustered. I stepped out, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. Please continue your work inside. Then I turned to my mother-in-law, the smile still on my lips, but without a trace of mirth in my eyes. Mother, in the contract I signed with them, information confidentiality is paramount. All financial data of the KH letter 1 EAFC family will be kept absolutely confidential. However, once it's an expense from the family's joint accounts, there's no concept of privacy. Are you so worried because there's something unusual in those ledgers? My question was like a pin pricking her inflated balloon. She flinched, stepping back, not daring to say another word. The auditor continued his work. At 3 p.m., the team leader knocked on the study door and invited Kevin and me in for a meeting. My mother-in-law, seeing this, also hurried to follow. Mr. KH letter 1 EAFC, Ms. Wu, the team leader said professionally, pointing to a chart on his laptop screen. We have some preliminary findings. Overall, the family's cash flow is quite stable, but there are a few unusual expenses that need clarification. He pointed to an item highlighted in red. Over the past 2 years, a fixed amount of 50,000 yuan has been transferred monthly from Mrs. KH letter 1 EAFC's account to an account named Zhang Waiguo, noted as startup support. Mrs. Zhang quickly explained, that's Kevin's uncle, my younger brother. He was having business losses, so I helped him out a bit. Kevin frowned. I've never heard Mother mention this. The team leader nodded, then turned to another page. Yes, we understand. However, according to our investigation, Mr. Zhang Waiguo's company went bankrupt and dissolved 18 months ago, but the fixed amount of 50,000 yuan per month continued to be transferred until last month. The total amount transferred after the company's bankruptcy is 900,000 yuan. The air in the room suddenly dropped below freezing. The team leader still wasn't finished. He delivered a final, fatal blow. And this is the bank statement for Mr. Zhang Waiguo's account. We found that each time he received 50,000 yuan from Mrs. KH letter 1 EAFC, the very next day, 45,000 yuan would be withdrawn in cash. The remaining 5,000 yuan would be transferred to another account. He paused, looking directly at Mrs. Zhang. The owner of that account, madam, is Annie KH letter 1 EAFC. A glass on the coffee table fell and shattered. But this time, no one paid it any mind. Mrs. Zhang slumped into the chair, her face ashen as a sheet of paper. She had not only indulged her daughter, but also colluded with her brother, establishing a shell company to siphon funds from her own family, all to finance her beloved daughter's extravagant spending. I looked at Kevin. He sat silently, but I could see his hand on the table clenching tightly, his knuckles turning white. The disappointment from before was nothing compared to today's cruel and sordid truth. The air in the study thickened. The silence was more terrifying than 1,000 shouts. Mrs. Zhang sat slumped on the chair, her entire body trembling, not from fear, but from the humiliation of her exposed guilt. Kevin didn't look at his mother. He stood up, slowly walked to the window, his back straight, as if weighed down by profound disappointment. He stood there for a very long time, long enough for my mother-in-law to rekindle a glimmer of hope, a hope that maternal love would triumph. But she was mistaken. Kevin was a scientist. When the experimental data was too clear, he would not allow emotions to skew his conclusions. He turned around, his glasses unable to conceal the coldness in his eyes. He didn't speak to his mother but to the audit team leader. Sir, please help me calculate the total amount of money lost in this startup support scheme, plus Annie's 2 million yuan promissory note. Assign all responsibility to Mrs. Zhang. She is the guardian and accomplice. My mother-in-law's head shot up. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Kevin, what are you saying? Kevin finally looked directly at her, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. Mother, this is no longer a family matter. This is systematic financial fraud. The total amount is 1 million yuan. Mindy and I will not bear this burden. It must be compensated from your personal assets and Annie's. He continued, each word like a nail hammered into the coffin of her old authority. This house was left by father, jointly registered under your 3 names. I will have my lawyer process the division of the property deeds. Your share will be used to pay off the debt. Annie's share I will sell to pay off the debt. The remainder will be considered expenses for her to start an independent life. You dare to sell your sister's house, Mrs. Zhang shrieked, finally unable to play the victim any longer. Why not? Kevin countered. Mistakes must be paid for with commensurate consequences. That is a basic rule. Seeing that logic had reached a dead end, Mrs. Zhang resorted to the last resort of the week. She suddenly clutched her chest, her face contorted, her breathing ragged. Kevin, do you want to kill your mother? My heart hurt so much. She staggered as if about to faint. This was a familiar tactic, using health to bind one's children. A dutiful child, no matter how angry, would eventually soften. Kevin indeed paused, a flicker of worry in his eyes. But just then, I, who had been silently observing from the beginning, took action. I calmly pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Hello, International Hospital. I'd like to call an ambulance to the KH1EAFC family villa. There's an elderly patient here suspected of having symptoms of a myocardial infarction. Yes, please come as quickly as possible. Hanging up, I turned to look at Mrs. Zhang, who was stunned, a gentle yet cruel smile on my face. Mother, don't worry, the ambulance will be here in 5 minutes. I've requested the best service package. They'll take you directly to a VIP room. A team of top cardiologists will consult immediately. I still wasn't finished. I've also contacted the high-end St. Mary's nursing home. They have special care services for elderly patients with underlying heart conditions, with nurses on duty 24/7. If mother's condition is truly serious, we'll transfer you directly there after discharge. This will both ensure your health and prevent you from having to face unpleasant things at home that might affect your spirits. Mrs. Zhang's theatrical act abruptly ended, her sudden heart attack miraculously vanishing. She sat up straight, glaring at me, her eyes filled with disbelief. She had used illness to threaten, and I had used that very illness to offer her the best solution, which was also the thing she feared most, being pushed out of the house and living under the supervision of strangers. Kevin looked at me, his eyes filled with astonishment, then quickly turning into understanding and a hint of gratitude. He understood that to deal with illogic, one sometimes needed to employ an even more ruthless logic. He cleared his throat and turned to his mother, his voice having completely restored its coldness. Mother, Mindy is right. Your health is most important. Just follow her arrangements. Mrs. Zhang completely collapsed. She knew she had lost thoroughly. All her weapons, all her tricks had become useless in front of this daughter-in-law. She looked at me, then at the son she had borne with such pain. Finally, she burst into a frantic, bitter laugh. Fine, Kevin KH1EAFC Mindy Wu, you two are truly something. We'll see if you can live in peace without me. With that, she staggered to her feet, needing no one's help, and walked straight to her room, slamming the door shut. 5 minutes later, the ambulance wailed outside the gate, but they had to return disappointed. I looked at Kevin, who stood silently, his eyes fixed on his mother's tightly closed bedroom door. Do you regret it? I asked softly. He turned to look at me, shaking his head. In scientific research, when a malignant tumor is discovered, the best way to deal with it is to cut it out completely, even if the process is painful. Leave it, and it will metastasize and destroy the entire body. He took my hand, a very firm grip. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you for being a brave chief surgeon. After the earth-shattering confrontation, the KH1EAFC household fell into an eerie state of peace. The calm of a battlefield after the bombs have fallen. Mrs. Zhang began a cold war. She locked herself in her room, refusing to eat, drink, or say a word. This was a passive hunger strike, a silent play aimed at stirring guilt and swaying her only son. The housekeepers were frantic, knocking on her door every few hours, but only silence answered. Kevin stood before his mother's door, his expression complex. He was worried, but his disappointment was even greater. He didn't break in, didn't plead. I walked over and handed him a glass of water. Honey, mother's health is hers and her choices are hers. We've laid out the treatment plan, but whether the patient cooperates is not something we can control. I turned to Aunt Lan, the oldest housekeeper. Auntie, please prepare 3 full meals and leave them on the small table outside Madam's room. Clear them away before the next meal. The food must be nutritious and to her taste. We don't need to intervene further. My orders were clear, cold, and logical. It stripped my mother-in-law of her hunger strike weapon. She wanted to play the victim of starvation, but I showed her we were caring for her meticulously, without compromising. After all, given her personality, she would never let herself starve. 2 days later, Kevin's lawyer arrived at the house. The discussion took place right in the living room. The lawyer's professional voice clearly articulated the procedures for asset division and selling property to compensate for the depleted family fund. Mrs. Zhang's upstairs bedroom door was slightly ajar. She clearly heard every word. That was the last straw. If I guessed correctly, that very afternoon, a tearful phone call was made from that room. And as expected that evening, as Kevin and I were eating dinner in silence, the family landline rang. Aunt Lan answered, her face paling, then quickly handed the phone to Kevin. "Sir, the matriarch, she's calling." The matriarch was Kevin's grandmother, the supreme figure of the entire KH1EAFC clan. Kevin frowned and took the call. Grandma. On the other end, there wasn't a single word of greeting, only the authoritative and cold voice of someone accustomed to giving orders. "Kevin, tomorrow, you and that woman come to the main house immediately." The words "that woman" referred to me. She didn't even bother to call me by name. Hanging up, Kevin looked at me, his eyes filled with remorse. "Mindy, it's Grandma. Mother must have called her." "I know," I replied, calmly picking up a piece of food. "What kind of person is your grandmother?" He sighed. "Traditional, authoritarian, and incredibly devoted to Mother. Father passed away early that year, and she single-handedly protected Mother. In her eyes, Mother will always be a fragile daughter-in-law who needs protection." "In other words," I summed up, "tomorrow we'll be facing a more powerful, upgraded version of Mother." He nodded, a worried expression he couldn't hide. "Aren't you afraid?" I put down my chopsticks, looked him straight in the eyes, and smiled. "Honey, before I met you, I once negotiated a loan with 3 loan sharks to resolve a client's problem. I've also sat in the middle of a press conference with hundreds of reporters pointing their cameras at me, turning an infidelity scandal into a touching love story. A family meeting? I think I can handle it." My confidence seemed to reassure him. He took my hand. "I will protect you." "No, you don't need to protect me." I shook my head. "You just need to stand on the side of truth, as you always have." The next morning, we drove to the KH1EAFC family's main residence, an ancient villa located in the suburbs. The moment I stepped into the spacious living room, I felt an invisible wave of pressure. Grandma KH1EAFC, a woman with silver hair but eyes as sharp as knives, sat in the main seat on a dark ebony chair. On either side of her were Kevin's 2 uncles and aunts, all looking at me with cold, sharp gazes. Mrs. Zhang sat in a lower position, her eyes swollen, her shoulders trembling, playing the perfect victim. Not a single person greeted me. "Neil," Grandma KH1EAFC suddenly slammed her cane on the floor. The dry sound of wood hitting marble echoed, the tip of the cane pointed directly at me. Kevin's expression changed. He was about to speak up to protect me, but I held his hand back. I was neither afraid nor angry. I simply looked directly at Grandma KH1EAFC, my voice calm but loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Grandma, according to current law, I am not obliged to kneel before anyone, unless I am a criminal in court. But if this is a family court today, then before passing judgment, shouldn't we first examine the evidence?" With that, I took a tablet from my handbag, opening a pre-prepared file. This is the detailed audit report from EY, one of the Big 4 global accounting firms. It clearly details how each sum of money was siphoned off. I have also copied out 10 hard copies, which I will distribute shortly for everyone's reference. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the astonished faces of the elders. Furthermore, this is an audio recording of my call with the St. Mary's Nursing Home and the International Hospital, proving that I arranged the best healthcare services for Mother when she had her heart attack. Did I act filially or unfilially? I believe all the uncles and aunts here are reasonable people and can judge fairly. I placed the tablet on the table. And finally, and most importantly, this is uncut, unedited 4K security video, recording the entire truth about the family heirloom jade bangle. I smiled, looking directly at Grandma KH1EAFC. I have presented enough evidence. Does Grandma still wish for me to kneel? My question hung in the silent living room, sharper and colder than the tip of Grandma KH1EAFC's ebony cane. The entire KH1EAFC clan, who had just looked at me with disdain, were now utterly silent. Their eyes shifted from the tablet displaying the EY report to my mother-in-law's ashen face, and finally stopped at me, standing tall without a hint of fear. Grandma KH1EAFC was the first to break the silence, but she didn't get angry, didn't slam her cane. Instead, she slowly leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes narrowing, assessing me from head to toe as if seeing me for the first time. Her initial anger had transformed into a deep astonishment and wariness. "Well done," she gritted out each word. "Truly talented youth. You haven't been in the KH1 EAFC family long, and you've already stirred up heaven and earth. Daughter-in-law, you're quite the schemer." She didn't dispute the evidence because she knew she couldn't. Instead, she shifted to attacking my motives. I smiled and shook my head. "Grandma is mistaken. I'm not calculating, I'm merely establishing principles. A family that wishes to endure cannot rely on blind affection, but on fairness and respect. My mother-in-law, I will still be filial, but filial piety does not mean condoning wrongdoing. Annie, she is still my sister-in-law, but love does not mean covering up deceptive behavior." One of the aunts was about to speak up in defense, but received only an icy glare from me. "Auntie," I said, my voice not at all polite, "today's matter concerns my family. I respect you all as elders, which is why I've explained everything clearly, but the final decision-making power rests with my husband and me." My arrogance stunned the entire clan, but it was the truth. I wasn't there to beg for judgment. I was there to announce the results. Just then, Kevin, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. He stepped forward to stand beside me, facing the entire clan. "Grandma, uncles, aunts." His voice was calm but carried immense weight. "From childhood, everyone taught me to live by reason and truth. In my scientific world, 1 + 1 can only equal 2. There's no room for ambiguity or bias." He took my hand, a public and affirming gesture. "Mindy is my wife, the woman I chose. Her way of handling everything is entirely consistent with my principles of life. Based on transparent evidence and fairness, I fully support all her decisions." He paused, his gaze sweeping over his mother, who was bowing her head, not daring to look at anyone. "Regarding Mother and Annie, I am very disappointed, but mistakes must be corrected. Our decisions will not change. Mrs. Zhang will have to use her personal assets to make up for the deficit. Annie must learn to take responsibility for her own life. This is not punishment, this is necessary education." Finally, he looked directly at Grandma KH1 EAFC, his voice firm and unshakable. "Grandma, I hope you and everyone can understand. My small family will operate according to these rules from now on. If everyone accepts, we are still family. If not..." He didn't finish his sentence, but the implicit threat was more powerful than any words. If the clan didn't accept our new order, he was ready to separate with me. For a traditional clan like the KH1 EAFCS, having their most talented grandson threaten to disown himself from the family was a fatal blow. Grandma KH1 EAFC stared at her grandson, then at me. In her eyes was a fierce struggle between old power and new reality. Finally, she exhaled slowly, as if draining all her strength. "All right," she said, her voice weary. "Your family's affairs, you resolve yourselves. From now on, I will not intervene." It was a compromise, an admission of defeat. Mrs. Zhang gasped, calling out desperately, "Mother, but..." But Grandma KH1 EAFC merely gave her a cold glance. "You made your bed, now lie in it." The confrontation ended. Kevin and I bid farewell to everyone and left, leaving behind a living room filled with complex expressions and a family order that had been completely overturned. On the way home, Kevin still held my hand tightly. He didn't say anything, but I felt his trust and relief. "Aren't you afraid Grandma will really be angry?" I teased. He turned to look at me, the corners of his lips curling into a truly radiant smile for the first time. "In game theory, this is called a credible threat strategy, and I trust you've calculated the probability of success to be over 95%. I chuckled. "You truly understand me, scientist. So, what about Chief Engineer Wu's family reconstruction project?" he asked. "Phase 1 is considered a success. What's the next plan?" I rested my head on his shoulder, looking at the clear road ahead, my eyes sparkling. "Phase 2, I said, "is to build a happy laboratory with my scientist, just the two of us. A place where everything is based on the formula of love, respect, and absolutely no confounding variables." He gently squeezed my hand in reply. The storms may not have completely ended, but as long as this man stood beside me, standing on the side of truth, no matter how fierce the battlefield, I would have enough confidence to win.